Hello, everybody. So I'm very pleased to welcome you all to today's Rising Tide Foundation event presentation, which features Peter Scholz. Our fearless leader, Matt, is down in Mexico, so he asked me to host this, which I'll gladly do. So Peter Scholz has impressed me when was that? October last year, with a wonderful presentation he gave on the north, on railroads in Canada's Arctic. It was very, very amazing because he went through all the different resources that are available and how to build the railroads and how to connect everything together. So that was fantastic. I was blown away. So here we are again. Peter is here, okay, and he's going to talk about the Northwest Passage, sea ice and biology, routing options, legal and regulatory frameworks, and the indigenous context. So I'm sitting on needles here. I want to hear all about it. Thank you, Peter. Go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for your kind audience and extreme patience for a 3.5 hour podcast back in October. I'd be very surprised if we hit 2 hours today. There's not as much to discuss, but I think the easiest way to understand how this podcast complements the previous one is the previous one I was focused on corridors, rail-based corridors, so land. And this presentation will be focused on marine areas and where ships can go and what we should know. And I have a deck that was originally presented to a Arctic Shipping Forum in November in Montreal, and they agreed to cover a portion of my travel, and then they never actually paid. But I'm not bitter. But anyway, the presentation itself was well received, and so I sent it off to Matt, and Matt immediately said, "Okay, let's do another rising tide on this one." So but what I'm going to be doing is I have the slide deck, but now since I don't have to compress it into 15 minutes, as opportunity arises, you can ask questions, or I'm going to hump over to hump is a bad word, bump over to the source material, the source information, and go into a little bit more depth. And if that's good, I'll take control and put on the PowerPoint and be off to the races. Okay. All right, screen sharing from beginning. Okay. So I've already read the title of this. So this presentation reviews the current literature on climate, ice conditions, and shipping. Three key conclusions come from this. The Northwest Passage may continue to trend towards improved shipping conditions during the late July to mid-October shipping window, unless the ground solar minimum predictions are true, in which case it won't. The Government of Canada has undertaken the actions needed to ensure the Northwest Passage remain Canadian internal waters for now, and have a lot of regulations to protect it environmentally, which latest they've been working to renege and bypass those regulations. So again, my earlier conclusions, take them with a grain of salt. Oh, I see a chat from someone. I don't see it. Okay, well, okay. And there are business opportunities here. So I'll dive right in. Go to the next slide. Okay. Topics are ice and corridors, commercial viability, legal indigenous governance, infrastructure and partnerships, environmental safety framework. This provides a global view of where the Northwest Passage possibly fits into our thinking geostrategically. We all know about the Suez Canal and the Malacca Straits and their importance, and how Russia has been opening the Northeast Passage in conjunction primarily with Chinese shipping, and how the NATO is apparently now trying to shut that all down. And when people write the Northwest Passage, it evokes images of ships and ice and polar bears, but not a huge amount of where actually are we talking. And that is what all those orange lines are meant to convey. And each of those orange lines is there for a reason and has a story behind it. And I will be talking briefly about all of them so that you're equipped um, to discuss Northwest Passage as more than just a theoretical framework. This is a so that was the side view. This is the top view. This one's even better. Um, you're going to see some dotted lines, which are the alternatives to a marine version of the Northwest Passage, because the Northwest Passage will not, cannot conceivably be used for 6 to 8 months a year. Even with, we saw some global warming in the 2010s and 2020s, but now all signs indicate we're moving into grand solar minimum, and it's going to be locking up again. But that doesn't mean that there aren't land bridge options, and they serve their own geostrategic purpose. My phone just buzzed, so I'm just seeing if it's no, if Magdalena is texting me to tell me something. No. Um, however, the main draw for the Arctic shipping distances is a 40% fuel savings because it is so much shorter between Europe and Asia. Um, strategic advantage, you're not limited on the marine route, you're not limited to size. You can get as big a ship as you want through there. Now, this slide was written a year ago, so NATO jurisdiction operates within stable NATO line jurisdiction. Take that with a grain of salt now. Um, enhanced security, free from piracy threats. Yes, you don't have to worry about Somali pirates or Yemeni pirates. You do have to deal with the occasional cheeky polar bear. And it is suitable for underwater passage for fiber optics. Um, so from 1979 to 2022, um, we didn't see a whole lot of change in the March maximum to ice pack. We did see a significant decline in the September minimum. September is when there's the least amount of ice. So we've all seen images like this, 1985 to 2021, that oh yeah, we could probably ship across the Arctic Ocean, all that kind of thing. Um, actually, I don't even that can't even be right because it says March 2021 on the right side image, and that wouldn't be March. That must be September 2021 that they have there. They made a mistake. But yeah, it just gives you a sense that you come across these graphs really easily, but you have to take all of them with a grain of salt. Um, and you have to be a little critical all the time. And when you see blank space, no floating bergs across the entire Arctic Ocean, it's kind of hard to buy. But I mean, I lived in Nunavut in Iqaluit for 2003 to 5, and Kugluktuk, which is on the Arctic Ocean in the Western Canadian Arctic, 2005 to 7. And I lived on the Hudson Bay coast from 2016 to 2021. And what did I see? What I saw was it used to be consistent that in October it's in the minus 20s, minus 30s, and when Halloween's going on, it is really cold. And last one I was in RV at in November, it was still minus 5-ish, and there's no snow on the ground. Um, but the actual ice thickness didn't change, and the breakup time didn't change. So what I was noticing was a delay in freeze up, but not a delay in breakup. And the polar bear populations, I mean, the Greenpeacers were going all hog wild about it's going to exterminate the polar bears. Well, I can tell you for sure, the polar bear population has never been better or higher. Um, and that's you were seeing intrusion of grizzly bears into the Western Arctic moving northward in response to the Victoria Island in the Western Arctic was warming up, but you're also seeing um, that the high Arctic was warming enough that the polar bears and the seals were moving northward into the high Arctic, and that more than counteracted the loss of habitat on Victoria Island and in the Hudson Bay area, just all the Arctic biology was getting hypercharged. And on one of my trips, my wife was literally locked into our house for 4 days, waiting for a polar bear to go away. There's guards there, but they're not going to shoot the polar bear right in town, and they were trying to shoo it off. But yeah. Anyway, I've come across a few maps showing the currents inside the Arctic Ocean. This is one of the better ones. Do I completely believe it? For the most part, yeah. So, a vice admiral at a presentation on Arctic ice basically said Canada has the world's most complex ice regime. And I will concur with that. Each location has its own story, and part of that is driven by currents. And let's keep that in mind, and we'll move forward from there. When I lived in Arviat, I came across this model of the seasons. So, and I found once you understand that there's 6 seasons in the Arctic, not four, there's six. When you understand there's 6 seasons, each about 2 months, the higher you go, the cold seasons get a little longer, and the so farther south you go, it's the other way around. But if you understand it that way, the whole ecological system and marine system, it becomes a lot easier to contextualize. So I'll just start in Auyuk because it's easiest because it also sounds like August. So August, early September, it's the warmest time. The land is greenish. It can be green in some locations, but it's usually sort of a sagey color, and the water's open. And in certain locations, yeah, you can. It's nice enough. You can go for a swim, either the Arctic Ocean or in a river or something. It's a short season, and the first part of it is significant insect populations like mosquitoes that are biblical in nature, but by late July, early August, they have tended to die out, and sort of mid-August to mid-September can actually be very, very pleasant. Come mid-September, somewhere to late September, you enter Ukiaksak. The best way to pronounce this is when you see a K, you go K, and when you see the Q, you go P. The P is from in here, and the K is the K up in the mouth. Ukiaksak. And then when you see the double A, it's kind of a long A. That's how you sort of learn how to pronounce these words. So at some point in there, you're going to get your first snowfall, and the water will remain open, but the land will be covered in snow, and that will last for 6 to 8 weeks, and it will get steadily colder. And then you enter probably the hardest time of the year, which is Ukiak, which runs roughly from mid-November to late November until mid to late January. And these are the dark days, and this is when the ice forms. And in most parts of the Arctic, the sun will be below the horizon. That doesn't mean there's zero light. You can be treated when you live at the Arctic Circle, because I've lived a little bit north of the Arctic Circle, you can be treated to a 5-hour sunrise, right? The sun never peeps above the horizon, but it's skimming right below the horizon, and you can be treated to just these endless vistas of sunrise, suns transitioning directly into sunset. It's actually very beautiful in some way, and then you're into dark. But then you have the aurora, you have the stars, and as long as you're warm, so you either have a warm house or you've got warm clothes, it's actually and warm company, you're okay. Um, Ecologically, though, this is a very important season because the animals that can't swim or the animals that cannot climb up onto ice, this is when they begin their inter-island migrations. So when I say can't climb onto ice, I'm basically meaning caribou. Polar bears have claws. They can get from water onto an ice floe. They can clamber up. Walruses can get up. They've got those massive tusks. They will hammer those tusks into the ice and they will get up. Caribou do not have hooks on their hooves. If they are swimming in water and they come to an ice floe, they cannot get onto the ice. So they can only swim in Auyuk or in the early part of Ukiaksak. So once the water freezes up, there's a whole bunch of migrations occurring all between the mainland and the islands and between islands. And the caribou are switching from their summer feeding grounds to their winter feeding grounds, usually farther south, but not always. Um, and I'll tell when we get to it, I'll explain why the Coronation Gulf, the Grays Bay port that's been so much in the news lately, is not a good idea because you can't break the ice at this period without extirpating a good chunk of the caribou population. Ukiok. So moving from Ukiak to Ukiok, it's lightning. The sun is now starting to come above the horizon. The dark days are over, but it is the coldest time of year. And this is the time of year when it can be minus 35 for 6 weeks straight without a break. It doesn't often go down to minus 40. Remarkably, the coldest temperature I've ever experienced was right here in the Calgary area 2 years ago. It was minus 43 for 3 days. The entire 10 years I lived in Nunavut, the coldest I experienced was minus 41 in Iqaluit and only lasted one day. Having said that, it was minus 41 in Inuvik last week. And when I was talking to my client in Inuvik and they say it's minus 41, I'm like, oh, the winter's coming back to Alberta pretty quick here. That cold mass is not going to sit there for that long. So Ukiok is kind of the continuation, but the migrations have occurred. So Ukiok is actually not as ecologically sensitive as Ukiak. And in many cases, you can ice break in this season, and the ice will refreeze behind you. That's the key difference. Then you move on Upingaksak, which I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that. So this is the bright time. This is also cold, but it's more minus 20, occasionally minus 30, but it's minus 20 is still Viking weather in my mind. And it's bright. Like everything is covered in snow, and then the sun is coming. You've got starting in March, you've got 12-hour days, and by mid-May, you're at 20-hour days, 19-hour days, and the sun is high in the sky, and everything is covered in snow and ice, and it is bright. And this is the period where people can get snow blindness. The ice, if an icebreaker runs through the ice at this time at this season, usually the ice will reform, but um, it's not going to reform to 2, 4, 6, 8 feet deep anymore. It's going to reform to a foot deep, and then it will stop. That because there's not cold enough to get that kind of those cold penetration into the seawater that you get where you get those 8 foot dense ice blocks. The importance there is that in some locations, mainly in the Lancaster Sound area, when I get to the maps, I'll go through that. The thickness of the ice is structural. So you'll see a series of over the next season of Pingak, you'll see that every few weeks or month or so, there will be a collapse of the ice shelf and a sideways arch will form between two headlands. And the arch will form pretty much in the same location every year. And that thickness, that 8 foot thickness of the ice holds it in place. You have a lot of structural strength when you have 8 foot thick ice pack that goes on for miles, right? So if an icebreaker has gone through there in Upingagsak in mid-March to mid-May when it's only minus 15 to minus 25 typically, that thickness will not reform, and you've created a structural weakness. In Frobisher Bay, which is Iqaluit, the capital of Nunavut, and they will use that same principle. A Coast Guard icebreaker will come in July, and it will simply make one trip through Frobisher Bay. It'll go down one side, come to Iqaluit, make a U-turn, and come back a couple of miles over farther. Within 24 hours, the entire bay, which is the size of Prince Edward Island, there'll be no ice there whatsoever, because they've broken the structural strength of the ice pack, and the tides just rip the whole thing out. So in Lancaster Sound, which is iconic where you see the narwhals and the polar bears hunting on the floe edge, and with all the seabirds coming around, and polar the image of the poles ripping seals and belugas out of the water, and all those kinds of things that we associate with true Arctic experience, that will cease to exist if you bring icebreakers through Lancaster Sound in Upingaksak, because you eliminated the structural strength of the flow edge. And then finally we get into Upingak, mid-May to mid-July. So the snow is gone from the land. The land is starting to bloom again. It's usually a kind of a dirty orange color, and that's when you usually, my experience was, you've got one day of plus 15 to plus 20. On that one day of plus 15 to plus 20, after the snow is gone, get outside, enjoy yourself, because the mosquitoes, they're a coming. And when they come, the way I describe mosquitoes in the Arctic is take one of those really big 1970s, rock and roll boom boxes, plug it in, and you turn up the volume to max, but you're not actually playing any music, and you hear that. Bzzz. That is what mosquitoes sound like. And when mosquitoes are at full strength, it's like walking on a mist. So there's a mist of mosquitoes, like at a density of 100 to 300 per square foot everywhere around you, and they're just waving all around you. And if you're not covered in DEET, God help you. Um, having said that, occasionally you have these wonderful things where you have a sudden freeze up, or suddenly there will be push down and the temperature will go up to 20. All the mosquitoes will hatch, and then it goes down to like -2 again for a day, and then they'll die. That is the best time. That is the best time because it keeps the population down. Anyway, I wanted to spend a lot of time on this slide because if you understand that annual cycle, suddenly everything else sort of falls into place. And then you can look at each location. It gives you context. So moving on to market potential for Canadian Arctic for shipping. Currently low interest because scheduling remains weather and ice dependent. Insurance rates are extremely high because the routes are considered to be untested. Lloyd's of London has not been very helpful in that way. They like to see something run for 3 or 4 years and then see it successful, and then they'll give you rates that people can actually afford. And that first 3 or 4 years, you basically have to have either self-insurance or the government needs to provide a backup to insurance. However, based on the Panama Canal fees and current capacity, the Panama Canal is basically full. Theoretically, you could charge $100,000 or more for freight per freighter moving between Europe and Asia through the Northwest Passage in the open water season, which, as I've said, is sort of mid-July, late July, until mid-November. So I'll go over a couple of options here. Option one is a Northwest Passage seasonal scheduled icebreaker-led convoy service from Nuuk to Nome. The idea here is that you'd have two icebreaker ports, one at Nuuk, Greenland, the other at Nome, Alaska. These are both year-round open water ports, and they're sort of at the limit of the Arctic ice regime at either end. Now, I've had experienced ice shippers come to me and say, we don't actually need icebreaker-led convoys in the middle bit, and I'll show you a map in a second. So where there's that little white dotted, this thing, that's actually where you need icebreakers all year round. Because if you remember, and it's mainly open water, the rest of the area, but also my thinking is Nuuk to Nome makes sense. In the open water season, you could possibly have something like, I don't know, Tuktoyaktuk or Barrow, Alaska to, I don't know, Iqaluit or something. And that was the reasoning behind AEDC, Arctic Engineering Development Corporation, which is it was hired by the federal government to invest in the port at Qikiqtarjuaq, which is on the north coast of Baffin Island. And their thinking was, we'll have an icebreaker service more sort of Tuktoyaktuk to Qikiqtarjuaq. I offered to interview with them, and then didn't because I found out the guy that's running it was in the prime minister's office under Trudeau for 5 years, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, I can't trust anyone that's able to work with Trudeau directly for 5 years. I'm sorry, and AEDC is has does have business links to the prime minister. Um, so I take that for what it is, but Qatarjuaq is also in the middle of what's called the landfast outer landfast ice zone, which nobody in the south knows what that is, which I'll get to in a second. But synopsis here is that remember there was a bore going this way in our current map. Anyway, can you see my cursor? Okay. So the Arctic Ocean wants to rotate um, counterclockwise because of Earth rotation and all that, and the currents of water going in and out. But then the Arctic archipelago from Canada sort of juts up north into it rather rudely and blocks that current. So if you've ever walked on a peninsula into the ocean and you're paying attention to the currents, you can see once there's this wall and the ocean currents get kind of angry and they swirl and they eddy and they have the kind of reverberating waves off at the tombolo at the end, those kinds of things. It's the same idea, except there's a whole bunch of islands there, and they all have their own kind of ice regimes, and there's a lot of microclimates around here where there's variations of level of cold that occur. So ends up happening is that in the old ice regime, where there's a lot of multi-year ice, this area here would never actually defrost. It will never actually break up. So the icebergs in the main Arctic Ocean it'll kind of treat it as one big island, right? These icebergs will come along, or ice flows will come along, and they'll kind of just be sort of pushed and dragged along northeasterly to Ellesmere Island, and then they'll continue on their happy way. But when that ice thins and you have thinner ice in this area, which by the way is one of Canada's hotspots for gas, all that ice now will float in to this area. So you still need icebreakers even in the warmest of seasons, basically to just push these things out of the way. The other thing is you're dealing with some very sensitive ecosystems here, and if you've got like a Filipino crew that are just used to dumping bilge water wherever, whenever, just used to more of a tropical climate, you can't do that out here. It comes to mind also an idea of the kind of ecological sensitivities that we have at certain times. So in March, for example, the seals will they chew ice holes. Each seal will have a network of ice holes that they keep open through the winter, and they will use their teeth to scrap at the ice so they can keep this little hole so they can come up and breathe. Otherwise, they die. And that the iconic image of the Inuit hunter holding motionless over a seal hole for hours, waiting for the seal to come up for a breath of air, or the polar bear doing the same thing. That's where that comes from. But in March, you get more snow, and you'll get these snow drifts, and it's usually wind-blown snow from the blizzards. And wind-blown snow, the rolling action of the high winds will grind up the snowflakes into a snow dust, and then just the motion will create a little bit of friction, enough to create a cementing factor. So you'll get basically styrofoam. You end up with the ice is covered with styrofoam, and what the seals will do, and the styrofoam is air permeable. So what the seals will do, they'll come up the hole, they'll build like a cave in the snow styrofoam, and they'll give birth in there. And when you've all seen images of the polar bear coming along, and they're in set walk, and they're like this, and then they'll stop and they'll go like this really carefully, and then they'll suddenly get up on their haunches and they go wham and wham and wham, and they'll stick their head in, and they'll come out with this cute little fluffy seal baby and rip it to shreds. That's the bear smelling the seal baby through the snow. What happens if an icebreaker comes along? You've all been in boats. There's that V wave right at the okay, and then there's the waves that go off. If you've been in a canoe and a big wave and a big ship goes by, you always know you've got to turn to face perpendicular to the passage of the freighter because you're going to get the waves that are like, a meter or 2 feet, and you don't want to be swamped, so you have to face them. Well, in the ice, that pressure wave is still there, but the pressure can't come up because it's under the ice. So guess what happens when you have a hole? The water will come up through the hole, right? And the seal is still in its cute white fluffy phase. It doesn't have waxed out fur yet. So you've just swamped the seal in freezing cold water. Guess what? It dies. And I saw estimates saying from anywhere from 1 mile to 10 miles on either side of an icebreaker passage, passing in mid-March to mid-April, every seal pup will die. Okay. So it shows you the kind of sensitivity. The wrong thing at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing, can have massive impacts on the ecology. And you can avoid those impacts if you understand things like what I just said. Um, anyway, I'd mentioned the outer land fast ice zone, which is over here-ish around Kekatarajuak. So there's a current inside the Baffin Bay, Davis Strait, that I can't remember which direction it goes, but anyway, it causes floating ice bits to collect offshore over on the north coast of Baffin Island, and these flows of moving ice go back and forth, and they do what they want. I know. I've hiked the Akshayuk Pass. I've hiked from here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. I've hiked from here to here. It's an 8 to 10 day hike, 100 kilometers long, and Kikik-Tarjuak is right. It's that island right there. Um, and one day you can get a boat to ferry you down up the North Pangnirtung Fjord to the far start of the hike, and the next day you can't because the ice flows move the way it want. It's a small boat, and the does what it wants. This is a good map also to show. Actually, I'll do this one. This is a satellite image that better shows what the ice does in the Lancaster Sound. So when I was talking about the arches, remember the arches? So you basically get arch 1, arch 2, arch 3, arch 4. Arch 5 is usually around here somewhere, and then the whole thing collapses all the way up. So there's usually 4 to 6 arches that form in any one breakup season. And this you can see is a weak ice here, and all this ice is a combination of, it's just really freaking cold in this area. So it's kind of partially broken up, but you can also see from the main ice pack of the Arctic Ocean, it's kind of moving in. And so if you're dealing with the Northwest Passage, you're not getting around having icebreaker assist getting through here, even in the best of times. It's just not going to happen. Now, everyone thinks when they think Northwest Passage, they think Joe Haven, and they think this route. That's, it's fine, and very often the ships will not even go through here. They will come around this way to avoid all the ice flows around here. But even in this stretch, you're not getting through here regularly with the scheduled service unless you have an icebreaker. Now, Grays Bay, the proposed Grays Bay Harbor, is right about where my cursor is at the bottom of the screen. I'll go back one. It's right there where my cursor is. There's a herd called Dolphin and Union Caribou herd. In the summer, they live on Victoria Island. Sorry, it's the other way around. Yeah, in the winter, summer in the Victoria Island. Okay, come Uki, I can't remember what it's called. What's the name of that season again? I can remember. Ukiaksak. No, sorry, Ukiak. In Ukiak. Right there. In Ukiak, this freezes up. So as soon as it freezes up, they go south over Victoria Island to the mainland. While this is happening, the the gosh, what are they called? The blue nose herd that live around here in the summer, they've moved south to the Yellowknife area. Okay. So there's basically two levels of caribou herds. There's an Arctic herd and a Barren Lands herd, and they go like this. Um, so in the Arctic herds will be up in the high Arctic in the summer, and then they'll go down to the mainland, mainly the northern part of the mainland in the winter, and then the barren land caribou, which are a slightly bigger species, will go from sort of near the Arctic coast in the summer, and in the winter they'll move south more to like the tree line, so around Yellowknife or Churchill. So if you ice break through here right after break, that whole herd's going to drown,
Do these
basically.
two herds intermingle? I mean, you move like they're moving parallel to each other, or do they intermingle at all or not?
Uh, the dolphin in Union does intermingle a bit. Yes, there's basically two species of caribou. There's the main, what the caribou we normally associate with, where they're kind of the size of a deer, but kind of huskier, with a very thick fur. And then there's a Perry caribou, which is like a miniature version. And they only stand about 3 feet tall. And then the dolphin in Union is kind of a mix between the two. It's not as big as the main barren caribou, but it's a bit bigger than the Perry caribou. And partly that's because Victoria Island is really big and there's no major mountain range on Victoria Island. So there's a lot of space here, but it's still really far north, and they have to deal with the high Arctic conditions. So they'll move down over here. But if you run an icebreaker along this dotted line in mid-December, that caribou's gone. That caribou herd will be gone. Um, and then all the communities, of which there's only two. There's two communities on Victoria Island. That's their main traditional sorts of food. I mean, they have seals to some degrees also, but the caribou is number one. Um, Great. Before I move into Hudson Bay, let's do we have any discussion? Because I've sort of divided this into part one, kind of the Arctic archipelago, and part two, which is Hudson Bay. So I'll just open for questions or comments at this stage before I dive into Hudson Bay. Hearing none, I'll move forward. Um, okay, actually, I don't like this slide as my first. This is a screen capture of the Canadian Ice Service in May of last year. Red means almost full coverage. Yellow means mainly full coverage. Green means pretty weak. And blue means open. Let's look in detail at this pattern. The model that I'm trying to impress here by this view is Hudson Bay is a lot bigger than people think it is. It is the size of the province of Ontario. And I mean the whole province of Ontario, not just, Toronto. Um, and it's kind of round shaped. So what happens in wintertime is you basically think is the most of the bay will freeze up 6 to 8 feet deep, thick. And the tides will bring it up and down, straight up and down. Okay. And then what you'll get along the shoreline, actually, I'll go to this image here. These are sketch maps from the government of Canada in the 1950s, and I was just like, they make it so much easier to visualize it. So you have this middle part of the bay, the ice is just going up and down. It's a sort of a 6 to 10 foot tide, nothing too crazy. And then on the shoreline, it will also freeze up, but the edge of this, remember when you've got 6 to 8 feet thick, there's structural strength in that ice, and it will form a flex. So it'll be on the shoreline, and it'll sort of flex like this with the tide. And so you'll get, the part. I lived on a house on the beach in Arvia, and I got to see this all the time. So you get this, and frozen sea ice is quite flexible. So you'll get some cracking and whatever, but it's actually, there's a flex point that goes like this, and where the two meet, you get a lot of cracking. because they've never quite, it's never perfect. And that's what this line is. This is a polynya that forms every year all the way around Hudson Bay. The reason there's so many polar bears is because there's so much open space for beluga and seal. Not beluga so much, but um, the beluga tend to move a little bit farther off towards Greenland in the summer, but really seal, yes, lots and lots of seal. Why? Because they don't have to do that scratching with their teeth thing to make a little ice hole thing. They can just stay in the polynya, and then they clamber up and they hang out, go to sleep, and the polar bears have to sneak up on them, right? It's part of the reason polar bears are dangerous is they're so good at sneaking. Um, so they have to sneak up on his, but the seals feel more comfortable because if they're worried, they just dive off into the water, and I mean they still have the whole burrow thing, but anyway. And then the wind is mainly coming from the northwest. I lived in Arviat, which is right over here, and boy, does the wind come from northwest. There's a lot of wind that comes from the northwest. You get two pressure zones, and they both start to kind of shove air. Anyway, so the freezing starts from the north moving south, but it keeps on pushing the ice to the south. So in late July, what you're seeing is when you see these numbers over here, you're seeing a sort of percent coverage. So 5 is like 50% coverage, 1 is 10% coverage. So uh, anyway, those are the patterns you're seeing. And then up on the north side of the Hudson Bay, the some of the craziest tides in the world are over here. So the Callowitz over here, it has a 30, 40-foot tide. And then there's Kudrarpik, which has it's like a few centimeters less than the Bay of Fundy in New Brunswick. It just we're talking like 40, 50, 60-foot tides in this area of Hudson Strait. And these create tremendous currents that keep Hudson Strait basically open quite a bit, or partially open. I mean, there's a lot of ice floating around, but it doesn't have a chance to cohese because it's always being moved back and forth by these crazy tides. And when you talk to shippers, this is the area they're afraid of because the ice just moves so much that they, you know, that's where accidents happen. And then you run into some currents coming through the Fox Basin from the north, and then you've got Southampton Island in the middle, and then you've got the Churchill River, which is a fairly big river, bringing a lot of fairly warm southern freshwater into the system. And then down over here at Port Nelson, you have the Nelson River, which is basically the Saskatchewan. So you're thinking North Saskatchewan, South Saskatchewan, Oldman, Bow River. Those are all exiting this area. A tremendous amount of water comes out here and tends to affect the ice conditions as well. It also reduces salinity, and less saline water is a lot harder. So freshwater ice is very, very hard, and saltwater ice is very plastic. So this is where your system. You're seeing a lot of complexity at the north end of Hudson Bay, and you're seeing open spaces, partially open spaces along the coastlines and where the rivers come out. Okay, so you've seen a lot of news about Churchill, and you've seen less news about Port Nelson. Now, Churchill is a proven business model for export of grain. So July to November, the ships, they go to the port, they go the straight line out. And if Port Nelson gets reactivated, and there's a group that is seeking to activate Port Nelson as a port, probably for LNG, but
Where is Port Nelson on this map?
Port Nelson is right here.
Oh, I thought it was
There's no
Churchill.
actual settlement there.
Okay.
There was a railway being built to Port Nelson, and then when they got to Gillam, they changed their mind and they went straight north to Churchill because Churchill is a natural harbor. I'll get into the harbors in a second. Actually, I'll just do them all in one go. So those are your shipping routes in July to November. Your most likely route in December, June is to head north along the Polinias and then come around and then sort of come up this way. So it's about 500 kilometers longer. Um, and that would be with icebreaker assist, of course. And I'm adding on to that model this thick blue line, which uses Chesterfield Inlet, which I'll go into more detail in a second. Okay. This map, a lot of you are already familiar with. This is the corridors map that I've worked on over the last 3 years. Red basically means there's a railway there. Orange means there was a railway there or there is a track bed there. Green means an engineer has said that that way is suitable for rail, and yellow means that it is the gradients are suitable for rail, but I haven't done um, that's me doing it, but I haven't done field tests to look. Um, why do I bring this up now? So I used rail as the benchmark for multimodal corridor because you can put a train there, you can put any other mode there too. So when people are talking Churchill, they're deep down they're thinking this. They're thinking um, a shore-to-shore route, which should go from Churchill to the north coast of British Columbia as a Europe-Asia bridge, which can be used in the wintertime. Because as I've said, as far as I'm concerned, Northwest Passage for marine shipping isn't happening in the winter. You can't do it. And if you could do it, you're going to basically kill everything. Um, except for like, one very narrow window from mid-December to mid-January. And then like, who's going to want to plow through 3 foot of three? How are you going to make money plowing through 3, 4 feet thick ice for a few weeks and then give up? It's just, I I've had some disagreements. Some people say, well, the Canadian Coast Guard is legally obligated to provide. I'm like, no, like you got to think about this economically. Like, we don't even have us. You're talking. Russia has a fleet of nuclear powered icebreakers that are the size of small cities, or can generate the power of a small city, and they have a much easier ice condition because in the wintertime in Russia the ice goes to the shoreline, and in the summer it pulls back. It just back and forth. That's all there is to it. There's a couple islands that can kind of shelter some ice, but it's nothing like what we're dealing with here, where every strait is its own story. Every strait has its own ecological sensitivities. Every strait has its own um, ice conditions that vary tremendously from year to year, and all have different arrangements. So this route Churchill to Prince Rupert, give me $1 billion. I can pretty much get it operational in a year. Um, if you gave me 10 billion, I can give you a shortening version of it, and I can use more of the complex supports on the Prince Rupert side. Um, you can see over here, where the railway is sort of heading towards Port Nelson and then makes a sharp turn and heads north to Churchill. That was the decision nexus. Port Nelson is here. There is a bridge there that goes out to an island that has stood for 100 years. They're planning to put a port there on this island, but the issue with the Nelson River is that it brings a lot of sediment with it, and all of these ports are very shallow. Um, and this is the Chesterfield Inlet. I'm actually gonna, what have I got here? I'm gonna bow out of that one for now, and I'm gonna go to our maps because I need you guys to understand. This is an iFishing website. But they have gone through the effort of putting all the nautical charts that are available together so you can look at the depths. And I'll show you some very surprising things. Port Nelson actually is a bad example because they don't really show very much in terms of depth here, but it's like 10 feet deep. So getting into Churchill, you have to zoom in quite a bit. Okay, you see this straight line? That's the Port of Churchill. Okay, Port of Churchill was part of the reason they selected here is it's a granite foundation. There's a granite headland here and a granite headland here. It's two arms of the Canadian Shield granite that form this natural space that the Churchill River comes out of. When you have granite like that, it means that permafrost doesn't affect your construction because God has already put a foundation there that's half a mile deep. You don't have to worry about ice moving your building. You can build whatever you want there. So that was a main factor for Churchill. But you see depths; these are in feet, 2 feet, 13 feet, 6 feet. You can't bring an ocean ship into that. So when you see these dotted lines here, 26, 27, this is dredged. So this is a hard gravel base that has been dredged, and you can tell, look, it's straight lines. When you see straight lines, that means people did it. Um, and this is set up 100 years ago for shipping out grain. And there's this pier is basically long enough for grain shipments. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no reason it can't still be used for that. But they had to these lines with the double arrows, that's showing the shipping corridor. It goes out to 30 feet once you get to the mouth, and out you go. Bob's your uncle, you're out. But I mean, you can see quite a ways out, you're seeing depths of 24 feet, 23 feet. Like these are not Panamax ships. These are freighters, but they're not big freighters. They're good old-fashioned grain ships. Um, Port Nelson over here doesn't I think they don't have the depths, but it's basically this is the Nelson River coming out here, and this is all silt this far out. There might be a clever way to build one of those underwater walls so it directs the current, so it creates a natural scouring and keeps it deep. I don't know, but they didn't do that 100 years ago. They opted to go with Churchill instead. And what you find all this portion of the Hudson Bay coast is you're seeing like the first mile is not shallow. Like in Arviat, I lived in Arviat. At low tide, you can walk out to here, and at high tide, the waters would be at your forehead. You can't walk out there without. Well, you wouldn't walk out there. You'd take an ATV and you'd be heavily armed because the polar bears love these kinds of spots. And this, Sentry Island, for example, is known as the Grand Central Station of polar bears. Um, I don't know anyone who has gone for. I lived in Arviat for 6 years, which is about 2 hour boat ride away, and all the time I was there, I kept on hearing, you cannot walk on Sentry Island. You need to have like 6 guys armed to the teeth with full-on missiles, like full-on missiles, but full-on like 306 rifles walking, and I should be careful about saying that, but we knew you can't walk on this island. Anyway, that's beside the point. You're dealing with really shallow water for quite a ways up, and then you get into Whale Cove, and you get a bit farther up, and you look at the depths that are in these harbors up here, and you're seeing 50, 60 feet, like right offshore. Um, and there was some concept actually at one point of using this as a harbor because it is so deep. And then you get to Rankin Inlet, which is kind of the administrative center of this region of Nunavut called Kivalliq, which is right over here. And again, right offshore, you're seeing 50 feet, 40 feet. That's good enough for a freighter. So I'm like, oh, okay, well, follow this the rest of the way. Now, there's this natural feature called Chesterfield Inlet. This is a natural canal. It is in the Canadian Shield, and it's there. I don't know why it's there, but it's 200 kilometers long. So I was like, oh, well, look, they've done the depth charges for Cross Bay. This is now 200 kilometers inland, and I was looking at this. I'm going, good grief, good heavens! There's 50 feet deep right offshore, 200 kilometers inland. This is all saltwater. So well, that's interesting. And I went down this and I looked for any, you're seeing 100 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet all the way. And there's a long history of using this channel for community resupply to Baker Lake. This is a lake, and this is where the ocean meets the sea. So this is the Thelon and the Kazan all both flow into Baker Lake, which is this lake, and this lake is freshwater. And the Thelon and Kazan are both pretty big rivers, like about the size of the Fraser, and their water exits through here. So that where salt meets fresh is sort of here, where it's about 20 feet deep. But barges come in all the time to the town of Baker Lake, which is over here somewhere. And there's also there's a whole mining complex of gold mines up here, and they just barge from Baker Lake, and the barges don't care about the 20 feet deep. They just go the whole way through. But then I'm like, well, if we're spending all this time talking about spending tens of billions of dollars to upgrade Churchill or rebuild Port Nelson, or sorry, then before we do that, we should probably look at this area as well because it's rocky and because it's deep and because it's way far inland versus these ports are very shallow and um, and as I said earlier, if you're in the wintertime, if you're shipping out of these ports, you're going up to here anyway. And that's good 600 kilometers. Any winter shipping is going from here out this way. There's unless you buy a whole fleet of those Russian massive nuclear icebreakers to break this ice, and I have no idea what the environmental impact would be in that because hunters never go out here because they can't get past the Polania, right? We don't know what this ice, we don't know what the ecology is in the middle of here. There's probably nothing, but maybe there isn't. I don't know. But we do know ships are going to have to go around this way and straight out that way. And just to be thorough, give you an example of the sort of things that I get frustrated at is government of Ontario just put aside X million dollars to hire a consulting company to ask to extend the current railway, which ends at Moosonee, Ontario, and create a port for Northern Ontario in James Bay. Well, great. That sounds good in theory. And they allocated whatever, if you have 3, 4, 5 million dollars to this, but then you look at these numbers. I'm seeing 8, 6. I'm 6 feet high. That's the water depth. Okay. So if you're going to put an ocean vessel into James Bay, the railway is not ending here. The railway is going here. You need a 50-kilometer viaduct. So you see where I get frustrated as I spend all this time doing this research, and then some politician or bureaucrat in Toronto says, "Oh, well, let's put $3 million and see how we can have a port for Northern Ontario." What a great idea, guys! Like, you're not building a 50-kilometer viaduct into the middle of James Bay. It's not economic. You guys can't even afford to build the Eglinton LRT for less than $6 billion, and you think you're going to build a 50-kilometer viaduct into the middle of James Bay? Come on, right? It drives me crazy. So it's like just thinking what I could do with the $3 or $4 million with my associates. It's just like, oh, good grief. Anyway, sorry, that was my emotional outburst for the passage. This is probably where the media will quote on me for being completely this kooky corridor nut kind of guy is probably the media's going to propose this. Anyway,
Peter, where is
um,
the big hydro station in Hudson Bay?
that's a great question. And you see that big blue blob?
Yeah.
That's it.
Oh.
Okay, so the Quebec road system goes up about this far. Actually, I think it goes up to Kudrarpik, this one up there somewhere. But I'm just going to highlight here that Quebec separatism aside, where is it? Over here, so just give you an idea where this is. So this is right over here. Close that. It's easy to remember because the big round part of the Quebec coastline. Okay. There's a long string of islands just offshore from this big half circle. And if you actually look at the numbers in here, the depths, I'm seeing 164, 187, 239. These are feet. Okay. And these islands that are right offshore, and we're seeing, it shallows up. There's obviously some sort of structure of some kind that shallows it up, but the shallow portion is 114 feet deep. Okay. So when you see a space where it's a couple of miles wide that's 100 meters deep, right up to shoreline on a rocky shoreline, and there's islands that are right offshore with very shallow water, that means that you're not getting crazy waves here. Okay. And I'm looking at this and going like, that actually is a great place for a port. So if I was the the guy I was just complaining about who funded the James Bay thing, I would have said, screw that. You're not getting in there. If you spent 10 minutes looking at a map, you would have said that. And if you hired an honest engineer, they'd say, give me the $3 million and we'll do an Ontario Quebec approach to something around here. That is feasible. And don't forget, the Polinia goes all the way around Hudson Bay. You're also right on the Polinia, right? There's no um, there is a caribou herd on this island, on these islands here, but they remember there's already Polini here. They don't have a migration between these two. They will migrate, but they probably swim, or they'll go right right before full breakup, right? Um, but the caribou here are known as being as their own subspecies, and the people at Sanikiluaq, they they have said that there's no interbreeding. The reindeer stay on Sanikiluaq. It's a reindeer population that was introduced some time ago, and then over on Quebec, it's the Barrenlands caribou system again. So and the two don't mix, except in very rare occasions. Anyway, now over here on Chesterfield Inlet, as I said, this whole area is very blizzardy. Um, I when I lived in Arviat, I experienced the worst storm was 110 kilometers an hour, minus 35 air temperature, minus 60-ish minus wind chill, 72 hours straight. There's a grocery store. There was a wind drift that built up on the lee side of the grocery store that was equal in height to the grocery store. The grocery store was 50 feet high. Okay, this snow thing was 50 feet of styrofoam next to the grocery store. They tore it out because the kids would climb up it and get on the roof of the grocery store, and people they're going to fall off and die. Um, Now, in terms of other depths, Northwest Passage, just to be thorough, there's nothing too crazy here. Where you tended to get shipwrecks is there's kind of a chain of islands around here, and you can get you can go around an island one way and it's 110 feet deep, and you go around an island the other side and it's 20 feet deep, and you end up grounded. So that's happened kind of in the Duke of York archipelago a few times. And this is another major frustration I have with the feds this time is when I switch over to the ice conditions map. When I worked for the Netherlands Planning Commission, we wanted to come up with a marine policy on the basis of all this ecological stuff that I'm talking about because no one had done it yet. And the only thing that brought the feds to the table is we showed them, hey, China came up with a navigational aid to use the Northwest Passage. And it's like 300 feet thick, 300 pages long. It's all written in Chinese. And it basically is like, if the ice conditions are like this, go on the left side of the island. If the ice conditions are like that, go on the right side of the island. These are the risks you need to worry about. All the stuff that's never been done in Canada. And then DFO actually came. Meanwhile, if you talk to the Canadian Hydrographic Service and you say, like, what are the safe passages? They say, we don't have the resources. The North is so enormous, we can't possibly sound depth the whole thing. It'll take another 100 years. And I go like, I don't need the whole North. I just need to know where it's less than 50 feet deep. And I need to know in these particular pinch points. So I need to know, like here, along the Duke of York archipelago, like, around Camping Island, these kinds of locations. Okay, 65 feet deep, 35 feet deep between the mainland and those islands. Okay, I don't need to know everything. I just need to know about a mile width through here. That's all I need to know. And that's one passage by one ship. So why don't you do that? Well, you can talk to the minister. It's like, you're the expert. You tell the minister. Write a freaking briefing note. Minister, let's allocate our resources this way. We've got a certain amount of sounding time each year. This is where we should check it out. It's like you work on this your whole freaking life. You're getting your mediocre federal wage and a good federal pension, and it's just like this is how you can contribute to Canada. This is how you can get through without grounding out your ship? Like, really? Um, Sorry, I'm getting emotional again. Anyway, Grace Bay is around here. The port is there. It is. It's deep. Got no concerns. It's the company is doing the sounding to come out, and that's all fine and good. And there's all this ribbon cubbing going on, and all this discussion about all season road from Grays Bay all the way down to Yellowknife, um, and I get it, but then I'm like, I don't get it because I'm like the original two things. Number one is I told you about the Dolphin Union Caribou. You can't use this. You could have the best port in the world unless you're willing to extirpate the caribou, the Dolphin and Union Caribou. And I guarantee you, there's going to be a whole lot of Inuit elders who are going to put up their hands at that public meeting. If you're going to do that, uh, you can't use this thing 4 to 6 months a year. And if you do, the ice breaking requirements, the energy and wear and tear requirements are enormous. And number three, the original business plan for this whole area was simply a summer use port, which to me made sense. There's a huge number of resources in this area. So if you have an all-season road going from this collection of mines to this port in the summertime, the ore can go to the coast, and from the coast, the equipment and the supplies and the fuel can come south. That's all you need. 4 months a year, 5 months a year for your shipping season. And in the wintertime, you have a winter road that connects down through here if you really need to use it. And I'm like, that feels cost effective. Meanwhile, you've got a whole bunch of communities along the Mackenzie River here that have been asking for a highway for 50 years. They still don't have a highway. And now the government's talking about reallocating a highway of almost equal size to here, which for me seems not a good use of resources. But I have to be careful here, but um, I there's a under Trudeau, federal federal funding became highly politicized, and Trudeau really supported a lot of paper tigers. And the bureaucracy went through an extreme leaning period during the COVID years when if you refused to take the shot, you were fired without EI. That knocked out about 10% of the federal workforce. Um, and that culture is continuing on. And I've looked at what Carney is doing, and I do support it in that he's you can feel it's aiming towards number one, let's get this economic reconciliation thing finished with our investments, and number two, let's look specifically at import export. What I'm seeing is a clash of cultures where a group of projects and a group of the way you approach the projects is focused on politics and optics versus a new class that is more economic and reasonable in its approach, and they are colliding with each other, and the latter has to look at what look like glossy numbers, but has to scratch below those numbers, but they don't have the kind of background that I have. Um, and what it does is it puts but also the Carney approach, the major projects office, is kind of overlaid over all the existing bureaucracy and regulations, and it's sort of supposed to supersede them. Um, but then you have, it doesn't, it's not functional right now. Okay. But I will give Carney credit in that some of the major projects that I had, so it was like, I don't think this is going to work, were really high in priority. And over the last 6 months, I've seen them decline in priority, but I'm not seeing new ones come forward. And that's where I get a little concerned because I'm like, um, why don't why don't you look at another set of ideas that myself and my associates have to propose, but we're not seeing those getting any attention or any screen time, um, or frankly, any interest. And it's not from ministers and deputy ministers not seeing what we're doing. So I, it's just, we're not as glossy and fancy. But we've done our homework a lot better. Um, so I'm being careful here because I don't want to, you know, ruin any potential people who are listening. I want them to understand my frustration from my perspective, and you will have your own, people, potential funding partners that might see my frustration from my perspective, but also see how I'm going from your perspective, and also trying to see how I'm trying to tie it all together using hard facts on the ground. And yeah, I'll stop there. Um, Now, for Chesterfield Inlet, I'll just point out these yellow lines are not proven. They are, you know, they are their gradients are suitable for rail passenger service. If you draw a straight line from Cross Bay to Fort McKay, which is the oil sands area, you pass Ferguson Lake, which is one of Canada's largest zinc and lead deposits, and you pass Stony Rapids, which is in northern Saskatchewan, which is one of Canada's largest iron deposits, and you also pass Enadai Lake, which is the location of a Inuit settlement, which was forcefully shut down about 70 years ago. I know because I worked with a fellow in Arviat who was born at Enadai Lake, and his family was basically the planes came in, they forced him onto the plane, they flew to Arviat, and that was the end of the story. But their Thai, Arviat is remarkably different in culture from Rankin Inlet or Whale Cove. Arviat is a lot of folks from Enadai Lake. There was a traditional Inuit population there, but the inland Inuit lived over here at Enadai Lake, and they were forcibly relocated to Arviat. So, because the route goes by Enadai Lake, I could see a possibility for reestablishing an Inuit community at Enadai Lake,
What
which I
was
think,
there that they wanted?
sorry,
What was there that the government wanted?
just efficiency. They did their numbers and they figure it's easier to take care of 1,000 Inuit all in one community than you know 50 groups of Inuit families that are scattered across hundreds of square kilometers of land. So we'll put them all in the same community. We'll force them to go to school, and then they'll be perfect little white people after that. And yeah, that didn't work. Um, so anyway, this is a $30 billion project, 25 to $30 billion project. But I'm going if we're talking about a if we're talking about Canada as a trade bridge between Europe and Asia, as an alternative to Panama Canal, you can use Northwest Passage, but only 4 to 6 months a year. If you're talking about a year round, where Canada is providing a alternative to the Panama Canal or the Straits of Magellan for a Europe Asia bridge, yeah, you can bring your ship into Montreal and stick it on a train and bring it to Vancouver, but it's half the track space if you use one of these three ports. Churchill, which is existing, Port Nelson, which is proposed, and Cross Bay at the end of Chesterfield Inlet. And I'm saying because of the ice breaking tendency, if I would say that if the government is at the verge of being willing to spend 20 or $30 billion to help build a cross-continental bridge and turn Canada into a trading nation on a stronger footing with more independent access from the United States on both Europe and Asia, you need to look at all three very, very seriously. And because of ground conditions, harbor conditions, and ice conditions, it's very possible Chesterfield Inlet will win out over these other two, and that you basically use Port Nelson for LNG, use Churchill for grain, and for the big shipments, you'd use this area. Um, I mentioned there's a lot of storms here, but the tides in Chesterfield Inlet are not crazy, and the way I'd see it is you have to have icebreaker assist, but you'd always use the same channel. So the ship would just keep on going back and forth on the same route. You never have to break more than a foot or two. Caribou, those in the know are going to talk about the Caminaria caribou herd and how important it is, and it is very, very important. Here's the thing. When I lived in Arviat, I was ground in Caminaria caribou herd all the time, and I was told by all the biologists, don't build in anything, anytime, anywhere in the Caminaria caribou calving area. At that time, the gray zone was sort of just the southern half of what you see here is dark gray. Much to my surprise, and I was told that will never move. The caribou herds tend to move in their calving areas, but not this one because this area is kind of a vale. It's better grass, um, etc. But then I look at the more recent map, and suddenly this northern half has appeared as part of the calving area. And I'm like, in the last 10, 15 years. And I think to myself, but there's been two main gold mines going around Meliadine Lake. There's two main gold mines here. There's increased activity on the south shore of Baker Lake. So and the caribou herd not only went up to the gold mine but went past it. And I'm like, oh, okay. They're deer. Caribou are a deer species, right? If people don't shoot them, eventually they learn to just ignore us. Um, So anyway, the Cross Bay route only goes through the tip of what they now call the caribou calving area. But I'm saying if you run a train, I don't think you're going to have hunters in the train car shooting from the train car, right? If you just have a train going by, and the main concern is actually that the caribou are too stupid to get off the track when the train is coming. But what they've done in Finland lately is they put a sound system on the train and it emits wolf howls. And the caribou they run, but they run in all directions, and they get off the track because that's what often happens with these kind of species of moose and caribou and deer is they don't get off the track. They just run in front of the train because it's easiest. They're not smart enough because they panic. They're not smart enough. They just run in a straight line. The easiest place to run is on the track. So, and the train is going along behind them at 40, 50 kilometers an hour. And it's like, please. And then they get tired and they stop and they're too stupid to get off the track still. So the train runs them over. Um, but if you with the wolf sound, there's increased the probability that these animals will scatter and get off the track and jump into the snow. And so you see how that would work. But also, if there's a major blizzard going on, I'd much rather be on a train than a car. A lot of money was put into a feasibility study on a highway from Rankin Inlet to Manitoba 20 years ago. And I read this study because I'm a transportation planner working for the Nova Planning Commission based in Arviat, which would be connected by highway. And I'm looking at it, and it was making the assumption of 360 days a year of usage, 5 days shut down by blizzards. And I'm like, yeah, right. You're lucky if you can get 320 days out. Like you get these blizzards come in, and I've seen it and experienced it where you go outside, clear weather, blue skies. It's like March or April or something. It's minus 30, whatever. You're not worried about it. You're walking along. An elder comes along and says, "Oh, you have to get in your house. The storm is coming." What storm? You see over there. The sky's a little white. Okay. 45 minutes later, you can't see 20 feet. It's still minus 35. The wind is blowing at 100 kilometers an hour. And like, there's been situations where I literally had a house across the street from the medical clinic. My wife's a nurse. And there's some situations where she would call me and say, I'm walking from the clinic to the house, which is literally 50 feet. Um, I can't see the house, but I'm just gonna go in a straight line. Okay, right? It, it so I'd much rather be in a train than that. Okay, so that about wraps it up. I'll just quickly go with the final remaining slides. Actually, I'll stop there, see if there's any questions. The remaining slides I have are more in policy and stuff like that. It won't take me more than a couple of minutes to go through them. But do you have any more questions on anything I've talked about, or should I just jump in here to the policy stuff?
I have a question. Um, so yes, so we would have to have these shipping, obviously for grain and so forth, but then also the minerals or the ores that are being mined in that area. was there is there a feasibility study being done on how, or not feasibility, but the estimate of how many transportation, how many boatloads would go through an area in a year or in those 4 months that they can travel through that area, and what the quantity is, or you're limiting the quantity that you're mining based on your way of getting the stuff out of the area. That's what I'm wondering about, how this functions.
There will have been some version of feasibility for Grays Bay. Um, what I find is these feasibility studies, they're so narrow in scope that they have limited usage, and their assumptions are can can be very limited, and they don't see a bigger picture. Um, and so when I've seen these feasibility studies, like I just talked about the highway one, I started ripping it to shreds almost immediately because I'm like, you can't evaluate the value of a highway to Manitoba from Kivalliq on the basis of 360 days a year. You have to go 330, and you're
Right.
at plus 0.01% at three. They've tweaked it, right? And the folks, I don't want to name names, but I have some relationship with the folks at Churchill and Port Nelson. Um, and what I've seen in those who are credible is that there's a bit of a shift from being this map has contributed to the discourse behind the scenes because people tend to fall in love with a project, and that's just human nature. It's like, I love this location. I want to put a harbor here. Oh, I want to put a railway here so bad. Here's the best place for a pipeline. And you see the kind of passion, and I'm just like, that's just human nature. It's like, oh, I really want to make my living room. Really want to spend $50,000 building a bigger living room when I could probably just move move to a different house and not spend $50,000 on a new living room. It's the same idea. So the purpose of this map that I made, the primary purpose was to put all the options in one place and make it impossible to ignore other potential options that are around you. Um, Partly my example was the in 2012 the environmental impact statement for Mare River, which is an enormous iron deposit, was debating which port should we use to get our iron ore to market up here in the north end of Baffin Island. The document is 3 feet long. The alternatives assessment was 10 pages. Over 50% of those 10 pages was graphics, really bad maps, like, you know, something somebody threw together. And it is just basically said, look, there's 6 places we can go. We can go to there, 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 we can go to there. This one won't work because of this. This one won't work with this. This one won't work with this. So this is the only one that'll work. Okay. And I tried to reach out to them at that time, and I said, guys, here's the pink line. You're crossing terrain that looks like that. When you see lots of little lakes in the high Arctic, that means the ground underneath is frozen and water can't drain out, which means you're basically building trains that aren't going to be carrying iron ore, which isn't known for being particularly light, across tundra. And you may be looking at 20 to 60% frost content. When you're dealing with that kind of frost content, it's not a train on ground, it is a train on ice.
Mhm.
Talk to the Russians about train on ice when they tried to build a track across Lake Baikal, thank you very much, and 1,000 soldiers ended up drowning to death. Okay. And that pressure wave, like on the boat, and that we talked about earlier, well, trains is the same thing. When you're standing next to a train, you can feel the ground shaking. It's the same
Mhm.
thing as the boat.
Mhm.
There's pressure waves moving through the ground, and if it's ice, guess what? You need to build a base big enough that the vibrations don't get into the ground. So they said, "Oh, we'll build this for $500,000." And then the Toronto-based engineer took a closer look, and then he said, "Oh, it's actually going to be $5 billion because we need to build a 9-meter base. That's 30 odd feet of gravel this whole distance. So it's going to be $5 billion to go 100 kilometers." And they were like, we can't do it. So then they tried to use this route up to the coast, which the ground looks a bit more like that. Um, it's still muskeggy, but it's sure a lot nicer. Um, Then they tried for years to get a permit. We couldn't get a permit because actually they had a good reason why they didn't want to put a port here is because the ice conditions are terrible and it's an ecological hotspot. And, you know, between seals, the narwhals, belugas, and the polar bears, um, they couldn't do any ice breaking and their ice ridging and all sorts of things. Meanwhile, I this whole time had been had been waving my hand and sending the occasional letter saying, "Please look at this route. It's twice as far." But it's mainly on rock and it spits you out. Sorry, it spits you out over here. It's mainly going through here and it spits you out over here. But it might be cheaper because it's uh, it's not so crappy. And you know, if ever we do want to build a railway to Baffin Island, we're set up for it. Um, you can see this line could be extended up that way, but so that's where the part of the inspiration came for just sitting down and doing this map because when I was at Alaska to Alberta Railway, the engineers were not looking at different alternatives. They were just like, we're going to go this way, we're going to follow the straight line, and I'm going, well, the straight line in some cases doesn't work, and let's just put all the options on the table that are somewhat feasible. So looking at the three ports of Hudson Bay, I haven't extended this map into Eastern Canada. So looking at three ports of Hudson Bay, there's one, two, three. We have all these yellow lines. I don't really see this happening. I think if the Wollaston Zinc Supergroup is actually developed, that it'd be easier to extend a railway from Flin Flon or something to connect down this way because you're not dealing with permafrost really or very much. I don't see coming across central Manitoba as ever being economically feasible. The same goes with this route. Um, This is a very long-winded answer to your question about feasibility studies. The feasibility studies that I'm aware of are way too narrow focused, and their assumptions are highly questionable and preload the answer.
No, I appreciate that. What what I Yeah, I share the same kind of skepticism about feasibility studies coming from the Canadian government. Talking about the high-speed rail corridor between Montreal and Toronto, I mean yeah, that just says it all. If you're looking at that history, right? No, but what I really wanted to know is because you have to get whatever you're mining, you have to get out of there somehow, and either by shipping or by rail, okay, in that area. And then because of you only have 4 to 6 months of shipping capability, then that would limit the amount that you actually can get out, right? Or am I, or is there another variable that I'm not thinking about? Maybe you can get bigger and bigger ships, but then that means you also have to have a deeper sea lane. So that's what I'm wondering about.
It's helpful to think of it in terms of the clusters of mineral deposits. There's the Golden Triangle, which is one major cluster. There's the Mackenzie Mountains, which is another major cluster. These could be serviced by rail fairly easily. There's another cluster which is called the Slave Geological Province, which serves this area. The Gray's Report and Road proposal makes a tremendous amount of sense in its original form from 20 years ago, which was simply a all-season road connecting the mining cluster, which is here, to the coast. And so this one road is serving multiple mines. It's bringing ore to the coast, and it's bringing materials and supplies to the mines. And you use in the wintertime, they just stockpile there, and then they're already ready. You bring in your ships, do rapid loading
Mhm.
of the ore, and because it's all season, you can bring in your supplies stockpile them in the summer, and then you can just continue bringing them through the rest of the winter. There's also the winter road to Yellowknife, which can be your backup system, but there's been a few warmer winters where that didn't work out very well. So I see that's where the Grays Bay Portland Road functions very, very well. The Slave Geological Province, but only I don't see an all-season road past the mines. There is a iron cluster kind of in this area, Roche Bay, Mary River. I mean, cluster, they're hundreds of miles apart, but it's all these very big iron ore deposits. This kind of geology continues into northern Quebec and Labrador, and so you have situations like the Nain deposit where there's a train that goes to the coast, and the ship comes in every few months, and they actually have a snowmobile traffic system for access. Um, then there's obviously the oil sands area, and we're obviously beholden to the US, and we get 60 cents on the dollar for what we sell to the US, which is the focus why Danielle Smith has looked at a pipeline of bitumen to the north coast of BC. Um, the other factor is the nations in northern Manitoba are very uncomfortable with bitumen exports, and there's a few isolated hotspots out there, isolated deposits. Ferguson is one, Stony Rapids is one, Janus Lake is another. Um, Michael Vena was just approved like 3 months ago, and it's basically an extension to the Flin Flon system. So it's basically just going to give an extra 30 years of life to Flin Flon kind of idea. And I could see Janus Lake. That's what part of the reason I tied into this line is the Lynn Lake is originally a mining system, and it would tie into that. Um,
Mm.
the issue with bitumen is because bitumen is a thick, tarry, goopy, sandy mess
Hmm.
that you pull out of the ground.
Hmm.
But within this goopy mess, there are solids and there are liquids. To make bitumen flow, you have to add a lot of butane and propane, called diluent, to it, and then heat it up. You
Yeah.
stick it in a pipeline and off it goes. Um, when it gets to the coast, the issue is actually not the bitumen. The issue is the diluent. Because if there's a leak, it's not the bitumen. The bitumen is just basically asphalt
Yeah.
and oil.
Yeah.
Now people think, oh, it's fossil fuels. It's not a fossil fuel. Okay,
No.
guys. The only fossil fuel out there is coal. Coal is fossilized plants that got squished over a period of time until bacteria came along that were able to eat bark. Okay, that's what coal is. Fossil fuels are hydrocarbons. There's hydrocarbons all through the universe. The moon Titan around Saturn is got oceans of methane. I guarantee you, there's never been a cow on Titan. The largest bitumen deposit in the solar system is on Pluto. I guarantee you, there never was a dinosaur that walked on Pluto. These are hydrocarbons. What that means is think about the oil spill off LDs caused a tremendous amount of environmental damage, but it's a thick, dark, goopy stuff that was released and it floated on the water. But remember the Deepwater Horizon down in Gulf of Mexico that went off, and people thought, oh, this is the end of the ecosystem of the entire Gulf of Mexico, or excuse me, Trump's Gulf of America. I'm going to call it the Gulf of Mexico. Thank you very much. Um, but there was no major environmental catastrophe because the bacteria just ate it all, which tells me that, and there, it's toxic, but it's not toxic. So anyway, with bitumen, the butane and propane is a refined form of petroleum hydrocarbons that does cause environmental damage. It does float on water. It is very difficult to clean up. The bitumen is more just this heavy goop stuff that's sort of just going to stay there while you come along and you dig it up. Um, so in some of my discussions with some of my associates, I'll say, well, why don't we put a separation facility somewhere, either Edmonton or Fort McKay, and separate this stuff, right? Because the solid stuff, which to date is mainly dumped, is the same stuff you use to build roads.
Mm.
And the world is full of roads. The world's building more roads. The world is always going to need asphalt. And there's enough oil sands in this area to keep going for the next 500 to 1,000 years, right? Um, so if you set up an asphalt facility in here, you're basically creating a factory that will provide jobs for the next 500 to 1,000 years. To me, that sounds like good economic development. And then you don't have, then you just take the liquid, you take the solids, you put them on a train, right? You just take them to the port, off you go. And if the train spills, then it's bitumen. Right? It's basically has been asphalt dump. Okay. And if it's the liquids, it's mainly like fuels. Um, those are nastier if they spill, but pipelines are safer than trains, but it's also separated, but they're not as hard as butane and propane. When I hear about environmental risks of the liquid natural gas, I kind of go like, why? Like natural gas, part of the reason it's so widely used is it just disperses so quickly. Like, yeah, it's very, very flammable, but the moment you open a door, like I've had a gas leak. You open a door, it's gone, like instantly. Um, it just it's very light. It just disappears very, very quickly. You have a liquid natural gas pipeline leak, it's just gonna off you go. Look at when Russia blew up its own Nord Stream pipeline to Germany. 3 months after they finished building it to export gas to Germany, because that makes business sense for Russia to blow up its own pipeline in order to prevent Germany from buying its natural gas. It released until they plugged up the pipeline. It released enough gas to like power Germany for like 3 or 6 months or something, and you didn't hear about an environmental peep about or any major catastrophe there. And this is a lot more gas we ever be dealing with. Anyway, I'm saying this is a potential source of the bitumen. The asphaltenes would be exported as a solid, and so it could be part of it. You can link up these different resources, and you can create permanent, and you can pay for the capital cost by accessing these extremely valuable resources along the line. And then you've got the line, and all you have to do is maintain the thing. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be enough traffic between Asia and Europe for the foreseeable future to keep a track like that up and running once the track is in. Sorry, I'm getting very long-winded answers.
I have another question.
Uh-oh.
Nobody else is asking anything, so I might as well ask, right?
Hmm?
Okay, so um, just a little while ago, there was a story on the news about some ship that got caught in the ice up north, and the Coast Guard had to come and break it out.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, okay, so because you never hear stories like that, and what there must be something more to this because isn't this happening all the time? Or if it's not happening all the time, why did it happen with this ship? And do you have any insights in this story?
Yes. Um, it's happening. Ships hit ice in places where there's very high currents. And the places with very high currents include places like Hudson Strait. They include places like Fury and Hecla Strait. They include places like um, Bellot Strait. People don't even realize this is strait, it's so narrow. Um, Fort Ross, there used to actually be a trading post there. There you go. Um, so the satellites go around, they provide details in, and it's these locations, the ice can move so fast that the current data isn't enough. And if there's fog or something, they might not see it. And that just happens. Um, so this is part of the reason that I say if you have an icebreaker-led convoy, the icebreaker is coming along. If you've got a series of ships behind it, oh well, right? You use that bow wave from the icebreaker to push the ice out of the way,
Mhm.
and then the icebreaker has kind of locating equipment that your typical freighter doesn't have to find these things that are not playing nice. So that's where the icebreaker-led convoy idea comes from, is because of the ice. Now, the other reason they're running aground is I don't have the map handy, but the government The federal government has never prioritized demarcating these passageways, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is coming straight from the professionals working in the field. The one case that I'm familiar with, I went to there was a whole hour session on the same session that I went to in Montreal that I told you about, where the ship on the chart was in a place where there was not supposed to be a seamount. So it showed as deep water, but it was marked as like subsection C deep water, which means medium uncertainty may contain shallow water. Use discretion and radar, which was on like the the chart is on the instruction manual on how shippers are supposed to use, but it's a little box off on the side. So the shipper is saying, we were in a map where you said deep water, and the federal government's saying, well, you didn't look on page 84 on the little box on the table there where it says you should have been using your radar more. Okay. Which gets back to my point earlier is
Yeah.
there should be lines through all of these passages that the government has said, go there, you will be okay. We've mapped a mile wide. Just stay there. And if you really want to be anal, put GPS relay stations, with they need 2 watts. So you need a windmill about that big or something. Um, and, so it spins or something, or a little solar panel. It's like, a foot and a half wide. And just put like a GPS relay station like they have at airports where where you don't, they could do a super accurate location. Both of these problems, those two things would go away. Gerald.
Actually, Kelly was first.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay. Jerry, you have to, yes. Jerry's next, but Kelly goes first.
Okay, thanks. Um, uh, you're saying like Canada seems to have their own ideas of what they want to do with, the routes of roads or trains or the shipping lanes. Does Canada actually have any kind of like 5 year, 10-year plan? Like, we got
No,
the new Carney government, and they keep talking about sovereignty, and they're doing all these things in the north. Oh, what are they actually doing? What is their goals? Like the Canada's perspective.
there is no 5 or 10 year plan, and the senior government officials of the government of Canada who have seen this map have shown no interest in it. But my argument, I'll say it again, including people that might be listening from the federal government, is I've got all the real, I won't say all, but I'm going to say with an extremely high degree of certainty based on the thousands of hours of work I put into researching the backgrounds of putting these lines on the map. These are the routes that are suitable for rail, which you should use for multimodal corridors. We just need to prioritize which ones based on our objectives. And I basically see two objectives, one of which I see as a bridge between Europe and Asia, which tries to maximize economic development potential in Canada. Another one between Alaska and the lower 48 of the United States, which I realize is not popular right now, especially after the stupid Gordie Howe thing rant that Trump just did. But we're not talking about the next 2.5 years of Trump's presidency, or I'm not going to give Biden an easy pass because Biden, the first thing he did was outlaw the Keystone pipeline after 10 years of planning. But same idea. There's a strong demand, and this is your options. Pick a route that makes sense from a capital expenditure perspective, but also economic development and natural resources development and ecological sensitivities. And that message is not penetrating yet. Instead, I'm seeing projects like the government of Ontario spending millions of dollars to look at James Bay. And I'm just like, 2 seconds looking at the top of the chart. You know, you're not building a 50-kilometer causeway, guys. Like, don't even bother. Sorry.
Oh, what about like even um like the military? Like there has been a lot of talk about like the military, at least um for I don't even know why, but they've been talking about protecting our northern borders. Like, is anything happening about that?
Yes. Now, there's two bureaucracies you have to deal with here.
Yeah.
There's the Canadian Armed Forces and there's Department of Defense. The two are separate. If I talk, if I hear, if you, hear- I, he doesn't like Grace Bay because of ice conditions. He doesn't like Churchill because of ice conditions. He also doesn't like Nanisivik up in Baffin Island because of ice conditions. He saw this map and he immediately was like, I like Cross Bay for exactly all the reasons that I just listed, right? Um, he also wants something over on this coast, but people say immediately Tuktoyaktuk, but Tuktoyaktuk is also like 10 feet deep. Um, but there's other options that are far along the coast of Yukon, which are deep water. I haven't looked at that one as closely. And then there's the DND that are the ones that order them to spend money on Churchill or order them to prepare for an American invasion, as if the Canadian military is going to survive 20 minutes against an American invasion. So sorry to anybody that at the DND that might be offended, but yeah,
All right. Gerald, you're muted. Okay.
Okay, you can hear me now?
I can.
Okay, good. Um, Peter, I'm fascinated by all this, and I'm thinking ahead. Say you're where you're talking about Chesterfield Inlet to build a railroad there and a port.
Mhm.
And if somehow our government in Ottawa got some brains and went for it. The thing I'm thinking is it's not just building a railroad and a port, but you're going to have to build a town or a city there.
Yes.
And I know Matt has talked about, when Diefenbaker was prime minister a long time ago, I know, but they were working on plans for building cities in the north. And I'm wondering, with the problems you're having with these bureaucrats, is there any uh, is Canada capable of building a city in the north from scratch that would be good for 50 100 years doing it right, or this could be even better? Would we have to develop a whole new discipline in our universities to learn how to do it properly? Anyway, just your thoughts on that, Peter. I'd like. Thanks.
Um, I've lived in Nunavut for 10 years, and we know how to build towns and cities in the north. We know how to build utilidors that work. I've continued being a development officer for the town of Inuvik, so I'm looking at the detailed planning for different buildings that are going up into Inuvik. Um, and the continuous debates about thermosiphons versus tridetic gravel-based foundational systems. I Where I get frustrated is that two skill sets seem to have been lost. Number one, I already mentioned the grain elevators at Churchill, why they picked Churchill, right? Um, there's a granite outcrop here. They put the grain elevators there. Bob's your uncle. No problem. We're over in Inuvik, sorry, Iqaluit. Shows you how big the north is. I have to zoom out so far. It's over here. There's an 8-story building over here in Iqaluit. Where am I? There it is. Okay, right there. That's an 8-story building. It has got a concrete foundation. Okay. There's no thermosiphons here. There is no look. It's the way it's built. It captures the wind, 100 kilometers an hour regularly. It's been there for 40 years. Do you see any warping? Nope.
No,
But
looks good.
good. So I went up because CBC said we're going to put a new building here, or we're going to sell our building here, and um, it was going to be bought by the Arctic Co-op, which is a grocery store. So I go to the one of the directors of our co-op, and I said, this building is going to be located on a proven massif that does not need to worry about warping. So you should put a 10-story building here because there's a severe housing shortage in Iqaluit. Do you see a 10-story building there? Okay.
Nope.
Um, and when I was designing a what the heck just happened? When I was stop doing that crazy thing. Good. When I was doing a subdivision in Kugarik, does he want to get to Kugarik? Like you lose all sense of scale. Oh, while we're going to Kugarik, just so you know, you see on Southampton Island here these pale areas? That's gravel. These are gravel fields. Hundreds and hundreds of miles of gravel, and I'm talking the good stuff. It's on an island, but look at where the island is. Just saying. Kugarik, it's up here. So there we are. So I'm designing a subdivision on Kugarik because Kugarik had grown out of its space, and I identified, which was then this rock massif here, and I walked on this, and I'm like, this is solid rock. Like there's no there's like you can tell there's like 6 inches of vegetation in the corners. So I said, let's just build here. We don't need gravel pads. We don't. You just put a concrete in, dig a hole 6 inches into the rock, put a concrete and pour into it, build a pillar, you're done. Right? The rock is your foundation. They refused to do it. They said, no, you cannot build in the north without gravel pads. So all of these, let's see if this works. No one's done the street view here.
What's with the geologists in this country?
There was no geologist, and the geologists didn't care. They couldn't be bothered because anyway, these buildings are built for permafrost. These 4 apartment buildings that are so ugly, right? They're built for permafrost. And I'm like, you don't need, because the rock massif is this, right? You could have saved 50% of your construction cost right here. Instead, you look, it's all gravel fill, right? So they did the same thing over here that they did over here, which was to put gravel fill on muskeg. And I was in the freaking planning department at the time, and I'm talking to the director of planning. I'm saying you don't need, well, no, you can't build in the north without piles or a triadetic system. I'm like, yeah, just find a big rock. Your rock is your foundation. It's a bigger foundation than you're ever going to build for any other building. So anyway, long-winded answer, I'm saying find me exposed bedrock and I will find where to put your city. And if I'm also saying give me barges, find me an exposed spot with rocks somewhere in here somewhere, and you can't really tell from satellite. I mean, you can see things like this, but that only tells you so much, right? Okay, so obviously there's exposed rock here, right? But there might be rock right below the surface. You have to, over here. Okay, this is exposed rock. Okay. Find me exposed rock, a mile or 2 or 5 miles wide. Give me access, give me a barge, and I will build you your railway. And I will just bring in barges and we'll just pile the gravel down as we go to build our foundation for our track. And when I say $35 billion, I'm kind of going on, a modern engineering company doing all the designs, but I'm also in the back of my head going like, you do this the old fashioned way, just, build it proper, that's how things actually get done without having to do all these reports and everything like that. Because nowadays, oh, we need all this gravel. So what we're going to do, we're going to find exposed rock like this. We're going to blow it up, and we're going to put it into this machine that crushes it all, and then we're going to truck it out, and it's going to cost $100 a cube. Like, yeah, when you do all that, it does cost $100 a cube, and I'm going like, well, yeah, but God already did all that over here. I don't know why there's so much gravel there. I just know, like, you go to Coral Harbor, there's a road out of Coral Harbor. Usually in none of the communities, the road goes like, 5 miles, and they got to put all this money into it. But if this, they just look at this road. This goes on and on and on and on. The reason it does this is all they had to do to build it was drive a bulldozer along. And this isn't even the really the reason the really this isn't even really the really, you can see it's still going. This isn't even really the super gravelly stuff that I was pointing at earlier. It's just I'll stop there, but I mean, like, miles and miles and miles from Coral Harbor. Coral Harbor's got like 500 people in it, or 1,000. Um, but yeah, anyway, I'll stop there.
Wow. Okay. It's so mind-blowing when you think about we're living here I'm living here in the Greater Toronto area with how many millions of people, and then you're talking about these communities with 500 people, 1,000 people out there up north, far away, with all the challenges that entails. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Yes. And then we also talk about some of these communities still don't have clean water or drinkable water, right? Yeah. It's just
Yeah.
why in 2026? Why?
Um,
Anyway,
there is that aspect. On the other hand, in some of these communities, you have social issues that are so pervasive and so overwhelming that uh, it, the daily checks on water supply just don't happen. And that so to make it happen, yeah, it's in some communities it's a very, very, very difficult situation. Other communities, not so much so. There's real cultural differences between all these remote communities, because when you're only accessible by air, each community definitely develops its own personality, and some are more functional than others. Give you an example, here in Holman. Where are you? You're over here somewhere. Not for Colston. Where? Lukaktuk. There it is. Um, if someone offered me a job in Olakoktuk, I would seriously consider it and moving there with my whole family. I've never met a group of people more friendly and trusting in my life. And every person you meet, you feel like they would, without knowing you, would instantly risk their lives to protect you or to help you.
hmm.
It's, I, it was, it changed my perspective on human nature just spending a night in this town. Okay. Um, and there's other communities that I'm not going to mention because I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm literally like, you walk off the plane and you want to hold a carabiner in your hand or a pen in your hand, because you feel this tension right off the bat. And that's where communities are unique, and they have to, the issues vary across the country, and the federal government admittedly has only so much influence.
Hmm.
But there's certain aspects that the layout of Ellakaktuk, and then its traditional location, the way that everyone has space, the availability of wild animals for traditional lifestyles, they'll contribute. that would be my preliminary analysis. There's other communities where, their history of forced relocation, um, some have sexual abuse associated with residential schools, or some have lingering issues from different Aboriginal groups that may have been at odds or at war at some point or another. So it gets very, very complicated, and you have to take each community as is. And that's part of the reason for the argument for co-ownership and co-governance, so that you approach each community in the right way, because each one's totally different.
Mm. Wow. Well, okay, I think your presentation gave us a very wonderful okay. How should I rephrase this?
Give
Okay.
me 2 minutes to finish this, and then we'll wrap up.
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Federal priority is to protect the environment. I put in this quote: "We're Canadian, we have a regulation for that." So between the Arctic safety regulations, NORDREG, and the Polar Code and fuel standards, I'm really not too worried about the environment. 4 federal agencies have overlapping jurisdiction. Then there's these land claim agreements: the Nunavut Land Claim Agreement, which is signed; Inuvialuit Final Agreement, which is signed; Northern Quebec and James Bay Agreement, which is signed; Nunavut Inuit Land Claims Agreement, which is signed; and First Nations and Northern Manitoba Treaty 5 not signed. And so the regulatory process is designed to protect things, but really the decision making is now at the First Nations agencies. And Inuit are not a First Nation. So that's a common misconception. There's Inuit and First Nations and Métis. They're separate groups. But you have to start with these institutes of public governance. And the rule of thumb for anyone is engage Indigenous and local partners continuous, early, often, and respectfully. I've sort of just said that. And this slide was for the people who are attending that particular conference. And yeah, so to summarize, where I think Canada should be aiming for is to get this line, get a seasonal system running, nuke to gnome, and build, upgrade. Based on the information I have right now, I would get an LNG pipeline to Port Nelson. I would get grain exports and certain other commodities that are not of a toxicology risk through Churchill. So I'd use Churchill and Port Nelson as a pair. I'd merge their right-of-ways, and I would upgrade Port Nelson, and that'd become the land bridge. And I would be making serious inquiry into Chesterfield Inlet. And I drop the whole James Bay thing and look at northwestern Quebec as your port for the whole Angava area. And because I have the comm, I'm just going to highlight for one thing, so people are fully aware of it, just why Prince Rupert was chosen as the western terminus of the CN Rail. So you understand just how much capacity is at Prince Rupert. So currently, the railway is setting up a preload facility here for coal, and it has a container port here.
Oh.
And that's where the infrastructure stops. But the reason this area was selected is all these harbors are deep water, and all this land is port developable land, all the way up to Port Simpson, now called Lac Coulombe. And there's 2 access points, one at Skeena, which is more difficult to build, and one along the current point. So, and Prince Rupert is fairly close to Stewart, which has very limited port space, but could be connected by rail. And it's also very close to Kitimat, which is nearing build out, because it doesn't have a lot of port space, but it's closer to the port. But these 3 ports working in tandem could handle 300 to 400 million tons a year, and they're currently only planning. Their current capacity is 40 million tons, and it could be they have plans to extend to 100 million tons. But what I'm talking about is if you truly want a Europe-Asia land bridge, then that route could become as important as the Panama Canal as a land bridge. And I will stop there.
Wow. Wow. I like that. Panama Canal in Canada.
It could happen.
Yes. Okay. That's
So,
exciting. That's very exciting. Now we just have to create that political will to get it done. That's what our job is, I think.
well, you know what? I'm going to say the political will is there.
Mm,
It's just obfuscated.
mm,
Um, it's obfuscated by so much false information out there. And some of it is like from the environmental movement, a lot of it is deliberate. Like you cannot walk off a plane in Nunavut holding a Greenpeace flag and do not expect to survive till morning
mm.
because they told lies in order to shut down the baby seal fur industry,
Yeah.
which when it happened, most adult Inuit men were seal hunters, and they had been forever.
Hmm.
And you just took away their source of income.
Hmm.
Um, right? So there's false information, and they've been very particular. The environmental groups at Tides have been very, very particular. They targeted the nations around Prince Rupert, and they targeted the nations in northern Manitoba. Um, I have heard many stories of completely false information. Um, just, if there's an oil spill, then there's going to be climate change, and all the coast of British Columbia will flood. I've heard lines like, if you build a bitumen pipeline, it will kill every salmon in all of British Columbia. I've heard lines like, if there's a shipwreck off Churchill, all the seals in the entire Hudson Bay will die. Like these are not misconceptions. This is a group,
Totally nice.
usually based in San Francisco, which may or may not be funded through other parts. I don't know. Alberta ran an inquiry into it, couldn't get very deep down the rabbit hole. But the lies are so egregious and so specific that it's like it's even easier to make people believe a big lie than a little lie, because as little lies within their realm of understanding. If it's a big lie, then it changes their perception of reality, right? And it's so specifically targeted at the coasts. Like it's specifically intended to keep resources within the country and to limit economic growth. Like it's very, very clear to me, and many others about that. Now, on top of that, um, you've got the Trudeau way of thinking, where they don't care about reality; they want paper tigers. And there's a whole hundreds of billions of dollars were spent over 10 years fomenting that way of thinking. So it's more about the paper tigers. And I'm like, what can you ship? Where do you put it? How does it work? Point A to point B. I've given you the map. I put it out, and when I see like Grays Bay, I keep on harping on Grays Bay. No offense, but I'm like, I, it's a trade-off. If you are going to make that a year-round port and a military port accessible by icebreaker, you are going to extirpate the dolphin, Union, caribou herd. It's that simple, right? You can't survive it. The herd will not survive that shipping. So you need to make that decision clear. Um, and I've given other examples why I think other shipping routes might work and how they tie into the land-based system. Sorry, this is becoming a monologue. So the political will is there. I believe that this is the way to keep our country united. There's two things we need to do. We need to grow our way out of the Trudeau debt, and we need a national vision and to grow our way out of the Trudeau post-industrial nation, post-national society crap that systematically divided men from women, Christian from non-Christian, old from young. They just deliberately divided society in every rift possible in order to get short-term political gain. Um, so nation-building projects is what can tie us together. Are there foreign actors involved? Yeah, And I go like Canada is sort of at the crossroads of five empires. Everybody goes, oh, empires. Okay, United States and China. What are the other three? If Matt was on the line, he'd go, well, Europe, Britain, Russia. We're kind of at the nexus of all. That's a weakness unless we decide to make it a strength. Switzerland was between the French, Italian, and Holy Roman Empires when it was formed. They're geographically divided, big mountain range in the middle. I said, how are we going to do this? And I said, well, let's make a weakness into a strength. We'll make ourselves a stronghold and we'll be a neutral trade zone between the three empires. Or four empires, because I'm sorry, I'm forgetting about Austria. Four empires, right? And the Ottomans are right next door knocking on the doors as well. And don't forget the Venetians are, the people that invented Machiavelli, of course, are having, no, sorry, that was in Florence. But, anyway, I'm going off in Matland, but I'm just going it's a weakness, but we could choose to make it a strength.
Yeah.
So we have to work through that. And that's where I'm trying to get, where I can contribute is I'm a geography geek, so I can have a presentation like this. And, I'm surprised there's still a few people left after 2.5 hours.
No, it was highly interesting, highly interesting. Thank you so very much. We appreciate all your hard work, and we really appreciate that you're here at the Rising Tide Foundation and give this presentation. And yeah, hopefully we have more presentations like this because people need to understand that there's so much work we can still do in this country and should be doing in this country. So thank you so very much, Peter.
My pleasure.
I appreciate that so much. Okay.
Right, everyone.
All right, everybody. Goodbye.